Why does the world have such a problem with Israel? I mean, what's Hitler's problem with us, and Hezimua's problem with us, Stalin's problem with us? And we can go through history, so many enemies of Israel, to the point that they expel us from lands. What's the point? Honestly, I don't know. Philosophically, I think it's because Judaism is like a transplant in humanity, because there's humanity. There are wounds, and the Jew comes with a set of values that are different. They're above what most people know. And when it comes to implanting ideas like that, the body sometimes rejects the transplant. That is, sometimes humanity rejects the idea. Interestingly, after a few centuries, humanity adopts the idea the Jew tried to introduce before being harmed. That's right. It's because we have ideas that are uncomfortable for people. In fact, that's how the Jewish people were born, in a rebellion against civilization. When we say the exodus from Egypt, Egypt is not so much about thinking of a country, it's about signifying civilization. Egypt was something that even the United States today can't compare to what Egypt represented in ancient times. And the fact that this whole ethos is told about the people who were the slaves of Egypt, and they are the ones who are now going to carry, like in the Olympic Games, the torch of humanity, this whole ethos of how Israel was born. It's uncomfortable for those who try to bring civilization in their autocratic way, in their system. So that's why I think it's uncomfortable. People just want to stay in autocratic rigidity in what's simple Israel. We came to break many of the previous rules.
One thing I always have to talk about nowadays, unfortunately, is the genocide that the Israeli army is carrying out in Gaza. And I have to explain that it's a lie from the Goebbels school. It has been repeated a lot, more than 1,000 times, until it has become, in quotes, an unreality. Why would the Jewish people be incapable, because of their own laws, of committing genocide?
Well, that's an excellent question, and connecting it with Goebbels, because Goebbels, for the audience, was the Nazi minister of propaganda. He had a well-known motto, which is, if you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes the truth. And that's exactly the issue with genocide. People say, Israel genocide, and people bought into the story. And the key question is, when someone makes that accusation to me, the first thing I ask is, can you define the word genocide for me? Nobody knows. People don't even know the definition, which, by the way, was coined. Genocide is a term that was coined by a Jewish person after the Holocaust, which was the most terrifying episode in human history. And the people against whom this massacre was committed, of millions of people, 60 million people, their main goal was to wipe out the Jewish people, down to the last Jew, even if he lived in Alaska. That was their goal, to eliminate them. That is genocide. And from all this terrible experience, the word genocide was coined, which again was coined out of envy. Given this event, and it would be, first of all, it didn't make much ethical sense for the Jewish people for us to be the ones who would want to do that. I'm leaving the facts behind, ignoring the fact that how can there be a genocide in Gaza if the population, since the war began, has increased by 2.02%? Let's ignore the facts, like Israel giving warnings or having 2 million Arabs. If Israel wanted to commit genocide against Palestinians, wouldn't it start with Arabs in Israel? Nothing they say makes any sense. But the accusation is simply the result, as you say, of narratives. I don't see much sense in it. It's simply a product, as you say, of the classic Goebbels school. Repeat the lie until it becomes the truth. That's how it works. Because since our enemies don't have the military power to destroy Israel, they don't have the weapons, but they do have the media. And that's why it's very important that people like you and people like those watching us share this kind of content so that we can counter this battle of media tools, because that's the real weapon that Hamas has against Israel, lies.
You just gave me the perfect opportunity to tell the people watching us that if they want to subscribe to the channel, give it a like and share it, they're more than welcome to do so. Just a little while ago, I was actually watching you and to bring things up to date and talk about something that's happening right now. It seems that the terrorist in a suit and tie, the current supreme ruler of Syria, would not only be willing to be part of the Abraham Accords, but is also talking about peace with Israel. Right away, the first feeling I felt, if you'll pardon the redundancy, was, wow, that's great. But then I hear you analyze it and say, oh, that's bad. But wouldn't it be good to have a break? knowing that he will betray you, knowing what he says, and knowing that he will betray you, knowing that we can't trust his word. Wouldn't it be good at least to try it so you know you have some breathing room?
It's just that we've already tried. There's a quote that's mistakenly attributed to Einstein, Albert Einstein, the scientist, who was also Jewish, about how stupidity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. We've already tried this experiment of making deals with jihadists. Not once, not twice, we've tried it since the Oslo Accords. Giving away Gaza, in 2005, it was tried many times with the jihadists. You can't negotiate because in their theology, such a thing doesn't exist. Peace with the infidel. Who are the infidels in Islam? It's us, those of us who are not part of Islam. I think that if you analyze this conflict through Western lenses, you might say, wow, how beautiful, finally peace in the Middle East. We'll travel to Damascus for hummus and they'll visit Tel Aviv's beaches. But that's a very Western way of looking at the conflict. I'm one of those who believe that the conflict should be viewed through forgiveness.
I always use as an example that those things can only happen in Alice in Wonderland.
Now,
since I live in Uruguay and I'm a Westerner, I understand. For people who know, I imagine you know Star Trek.
Yes.
You know it exists. Star Trek? Well, in Star Trek, humans travel across the galaxy and get to know other kinds of civilizations. We can't expect the Klingons to think like us. Obviously, we Westerners can't understand, at least not easily, how a jihadist thinks. And sometimes it happens to me because I'm a Westerner that I end up reasoning like a Westerner, and I tell him that's fine. At least 10 years of peace, as Hamas proposed, is incredible. In the proposal, it was 5 years of ceasefire. So you're telling me that you want 5 years just to go back to war? No, let's talk about peace, not about when we're going back to war.
Of course, that's the thing. The dialogue here with people like Abu Muhammad al-Yulani is not a diplomatic dialogue, it's a religious dialogue. That's why it's very important when dealing with Middle Eastern geopolitics to understand religion. That's one of the advantages, for example, that an Orthodox Jew who is familiar with this kind of language has. Because there are also tangential points between the Quran and the Torah, but the more you immerse yourself in Islam, the more you understand these kinds of points. What you're saying, a 10-year peace, isn't a coincidence. That's what Muhammad, their prophet in Islam, did, which was the peace of Hudaybiyah, as they call it, that Muhammad made with the infidels. A peace of 9 months, 9 years, 9 months, 9 weeks. But what happened? And he did that, he made the pact when Muhammad was weak and his army was weak. When the time came that the men left, the men with whom he had made peace left the city. That is, the enemy was weak. Muhammad broke the pact before it expired. They broke it, attacked, and conquered. When asked why, he replied, "Is there no peace with infidels?" So, that is one of the many sources that Islam has to be able to make peace agreements, but this also has a positive side. Why? What does it mean that if the radical Muslim, in his mind, it's, well, I can make peace with the enemy if I'm in a position of weakness, but the moment I become strong, I'm going to break the peace. What does that mean? That if I'm on the other side of the coin, if I'm Israel, if I'm strong, I'm going to have peace. Because he will always make a temporary peace with me, eternal. That's why I have to be eternally strong, so that his false peace lasts forever. And that's why it's very important for all those who say, no, but Israel has weapons and missiles and bombs. Exactly, this is what King David said with great wisdom. Hashem ozle amo yiten, Hashem yavarek et amo vashalom. That God gives strength to his people, God blesses his people with peace. Strength in this Middle Eastern context is synonymous with peace. If you are strong, you have peace. This can be studied anthropologically like this. In fact, it developed among the tribes of the Middle East, the Arabian Peninsula. It was whoever had the well of water, the strong one. If the other is strong and you're not, don't make war. If you are stronger, they don't make war. That's the mentality that has developed here over 2 millennia. It's a deeply rooted reality, and religion is simply a branch of this same anthropology that develops here. That's why Israel, we have to be strong, and that's why it's good to keep ourselves in this, let's say, tension, because you can make peace without making peace, meaning you don't have to sign peace. Signing papers is a very Western idea. Here, it doesn't really work that way. For example, the Abraham Accords claimed to make peace with Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, but there was already peace with them. It's just that to put on a show, to give, let's say, like on social media, the blue check mark for influencers, to give it to Donald Trump. So these countries get together and sign a little piece of paper that doesn't mean anything, because this peace already existed. The same thing happens with radicals like him. If force is always maintained, peace is always maintained, there's no need to sign any paper. That's the reality. It's very tense, it's exhausting, but that's the conclusion you come to when you know the sources of radical people like Giuliani or like Zenguari, something like that.
Another thing that happens to me or to us, for example, here in Uruguay, we have a politician who unfortunately was elected as a congressman who is deeply, he's not, I always say that the anti-Semite doesn't exist. I always say the anti-Zionist doesn't exist. They're simply modern terms. So it doesn't sound so bad to say that someone is anti-Jewish. He's a lawyer, openly anti-Jewish. It scares me because last time I saw photos of him when he was young, and it's incredible how much he looks like Goebbels, even his face. But beyond that, he always uses as an argument that Jews believe we are the chosen people. So if we are the chosen people, does that mean the rest of the peoples are cockroaches that can be stepped on? What does it mean to be the chosen people?
Well, good question. But maybe before answering specifically, it's curious that these same people are the ones who say, look, can't you see there are anti-Zionist Jews like Natra and Carter? And they use, for example, who are Natra and Carter for the audience? It's a sect that's like, I don't know, 2,000 people in the whole world. Out of a Jewish population of about 14 million, I mean, they're a minority who oppose the state of Israel. And since people see them with the shremer, that is, with the hat, and with this, the hair like this, and the beard, and they see them with Palestinian flags, they say, oh, these are the real Jews. But let's see. And I hear you, I know who you're referring to, even if you don't say their name, I won't say it either. But that same guy uses the Natra Ikarta as an example of true Judaism and says, I can't be anti-Semitic, I don't hate Jews. Why? Because I agree with them that they oppose the state of Israel, I'm simply against it. But you have to look at their own narrative because it's precisely these radical, let's say, religious people who claim to be the chosen people. If you ask an anti-Zionist Necharai Karta, are you the chosen people? He'll say yes. That is to say, and precisely paradoxically, Israel is a country that was founded as a secular state. And that's the criticism from these ultra-Orthodox. That's their criticism. How can there be Jews who don't observe Shabbat? In other words, who aren't strict in following Jewish law? And it's precisely the Jews who are atheists, the socialists of the 20th century, Ben-Gurion, all of them, who didn't say we are the chosen people because they didn't even believe in God to be chosen by him. So all that narrative is simply nonsense. It's stupid. And to your question, what is the chosen people? Is this it? For me, the answer I really like is the one from the philosopher Emmanuel Levinas. And he basically says that there's a kind of universalism within the concept of being chosen. Because I'll say it, maybe it will sound a bit complicated, that's how he puts it, but that one person is always better than everyone among everyone, just as everyone is better than everyone among everyone. That is to say, Israel has a specific role in Jewish literature, and this is brought up, for example, by one of the Jewish philosophers from the 10th or 11th century, Rabbi Yehuda Levi. He brings a book called Accusations, and he writes that Israel is to the nations as the heart is to the body. Why? Because the heart has a role, which is to pump blood. Israel has a role, which is to provide ideas, to give an explanation of what the direction should be. But there are other organs. There's the brain and there's the kidney. And a body can't live without a brain. And it can't live without a kidney and not without a heart either. If the brain is missing, the body doesn't exist. It's the same with nations. It's not just because you're chosen to have a role, it's the choice of Israel, chosen to have a role, but you can't live without other nations. That is, it's not that we're going to have superiority. Maimonides, another one of the great thinkers in Jewish philosophy, he writes explicitly, when the Mashiach, the Messiah, comes, the point is not to dominate over other nations. That's not why the Messiah comes. Rather, we will be in a time when the people of Israel can sit and study Torah. In other words, it's unrelated to the narratives they promote. Those ignorant people who, as you say, are scary because they use an extremely ignorant discourse that the masses love because it's so sensationalist and so distorted. It's scary how easy it is. Like you said, Christian Goebbels, that's how the Shoah and the worst times for Jewish people began. It was always with subtle but aggressive speeches, and it spread and the myth started until the violence began in a concrete way.
And why does it happen that anti-Judaism, or anti-Semitism as it's called, anti-Semitism, I'm really bad when it comes to memory. Anti-Semitism emerged in the year 1870. And something when a journalist in Europe who was anti-Jewish said, no, I'm not anti-Jewish, I'm anti-Semitic. And after World War II, since it sounded bad to say you were anti-Semitic because it referred to the Jews who came from the Holocaust, anti-Zionism was born, which are different ways of being anti-Jewish. We always end up in the same place. Why anti-Semitism? Why has anti-Judaism practically become a movement since October 7th?
Wow. That's very true. That's the feeling you get, and it's not just a feeling. Those are the facts. In every country you look at, particularly in Europe, the rates of attacks against Jews have risen by more than 200% in many places. Even so, why? Just regarding the terminology also, so the audience can get to know the term anti-Semitism a bit more. That's the one that applies. Wilhelm Marr, what he says is that there is the German people, Aryanism, yes, the German people. And this is a struggle against the Semites, the Jews. So that's the title. The struggle against the Semites is anti-Semitism. Is it Germanism or Aryanism against anti-Semitism? Another term was coined by a Jew, Leon Pinsky, who created the term Judeophobia, unlike anti-Semitism coined by anti-Semite Wilhelm Marr. Judeophobia is an evil. It is perhaps the oldest hatred in the history of humanity. It's very easy. It's deeply rooted, particularly in the West. We already know that through those variations, it also reached the currents of Islamic countries and so on. But European consciousness was born together with anti-Semitic consciousness. Because Christianity, which adopts ideas like that the Jews killed God and similar accusations, are two forms of consciousness that develop in parallel. That's why Western consciousness has the deeply rooted idea that the Jew is the one who holds the power. If the Jew is so strong, it's because he's so powerful that he killed God. That's how strong he is. And the Jew poisons the wells and is an inferior race. We're going to put it that way. I mean, there will always be an excuse. And as you rightly mentioned, the Holocaust happens. And the massacre of Jews was so terrible that Europe was left in shock. They were left perplexed. How could the massacre of 6 million Jews be allowed? So they said, well, it's not okay to say, I hate Jews anymore. I don't hate Jews anymore. You can't say that because it was wrong. We already see the consequences of what happens if we hate Jews. A real genocide occurs, which is the Holocaust. But the hatred is still there. It was simply on pause until October 7th. As you rightly mentioned, anti-Semitism is the disguise. And finally, the argument wakes up. Finally, I can bring out the argument I've always had, that the Jews are the most powerful. Don't you see it already? It's not like in the Middle Ages, when Jews were accused of sacrificing children to make matzah. No, now it's Jews sacrificing children in Gaza with bombs. It's not that Jews poison wells like in the Middle Ages and the Black Plague. No, now Jews are stealing water from Gaza. They'll always draw parallels between medieval and modern accusations. This will persist, but now the disguise is anti-Zionism. No longer hatred of Jews, but of countries. But I think this was the biggest trigger. It's very easy. Any idiot can grab a camera and say anything. It goes viral on TikTok in a minute. And then, for example, there's this rapper, Kanye West, who now goes by Ye West. He can say any nonsense, and since he has 30 million followers, he's going to say things against Jews, display swastikas, and act outrageously. People will normalize it because he's a famous rapper and claims he's telling the truth. How can we doubt the logic of Kanye West? So because of social media, it became very, very easy for people to say anything. Now, anyone who used to hide their ideas can now normalize hate like that. So I think that's why, because of social media, and because finally the anti-Semite found the best excuse, which is Israel defending itself.
You just reminded me, it's not related to what we're talking about, but you reminded me just yesterday. I love watching Fonseca's reports on Solo Fonseca. You probably know him or have seen him before. And yesterday he did a very interesting report about the environment and about environmental groups and how have they used half-truths to get what they want. Well, to achieve their goals. And you reminded me of that. I recommend everyone to just look up Fonseca, because you don't have to agree with him. He has reports that are very good, just like we don't have to agree with each other. In fact, clearly you are a person, I don't know if I should call you religious, but yes, you are a believer, someone who is respectful. I don't need to know you personally. Just by the fact that you respect Shabbat and that you fast on Yom Kippur, well, I don't do any of that. I don't do any of that. But the day they came for us in Germany, they didn't ask if we went to synagogue, if we kept Shabbat, if we were left wing, if we were right wing, or if we liked Vivi. They simply put us in a gas chamber. And I say it in plural because my great grandparents were executed that way. And one thing that stayed with me from childhood is the luck of having been able to talk a lot with my grandfather, and that my grandfather would tell me how they were arriving. The letters from a sister who had escaped to the north of Moscow and was finding out about the siblings who were dying. And it's as if I had lived it myself. In fact, I never watched Holocaust movies again. It's something I don't need to see. I feel like I have all that information in my DNA. I don't even know how I got to this part, but it hurts me deeply when people try to trivialize the Holocaust, saying, look, these Jews are doing to the Palestinians the same thing the Nazis did to them. Imagine I tell people who aren't Jewish, there are a lot of people who follow me who aren't Jewish, and I thank them deeply. But imagine that one day you open your front door and there's someone telling you your son is a child molester. It's more or less the same thing we feel every day when we're accused of genocide. How can I reach the heart, so to speak, of that person who is so convinced that we're genocidal, to at least make them doubt?
Okay, I'm going to read you a poem. Here it is. Okay, this was written by Martin Niemöller. I hope I pronounced it right, because it's with an E. Niemöller. For anyone who wants to look him up, he wasn't Jewish and says so himself. First, they came for the socialists. This is talking about the Shoah, the Holocaust. First, they came for the socialists, and I kept silent because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I said nothing because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me. By then, there was no one left to speak for me. The lesson is that it starts with the Jews. Historically, it has always been that way. I don't know if it's a coincidence, but in fact, I saw a book, The Canary in the Mine, and it refers to Israel. What is the canary in the mine? Today, there are oxygen machines in mining, but before, in mining, when they went deep inside, since these are tunnels inside mountains, they would bring in a bird. If the bird died, it meant the oxygen was running out, and the miners had to get out quickly so they wouldn't suffocate. Israel, we are the canary in the mine. Israel, we are that little Israel. I mean, the Jewish people. We are that little canary. In the midst of an adversity that the minor, Western society, whoever it may be, doesn't feel, doesn't perceive. The first to perceive it and the first to fall is the Jew, because it's an easy mind to attack, an easy mind to persecute. We are historically the first ones. I invite the audience to notice those countries that started and nations that don't perceive it as power. The third one doesn't perceive it. Corruption began, leading to persecution and slavery. Who were the first targets? Which minority did it start with? In many cases, it was where there were Jews, with the Jewish people, totalitarian regimes, dictatorships. What you mentioned about that the Nazis made no distinction between Orthodox and non-Orthodox Jews. It's the same thing that happens today. On October 7th, what did Hamas do? Did Hamas go looking for who was wearing a uniform? Hamas. They didn't go to kidnap 9-month-old babies because they were Jewish. They went to kidnap Thai workers for working with Jews. In other words, they went to the darkest place. Anyone who's read the Hamas founding charter knows it starts this way. It starts by saying that the target is Israel, the Jews, and it talks about a global caliphate. In other words, it's everyone's turn here too. It's just that the Jews are in the front row in every aspect. So yes, it's a big mystery as to why exactly. It's just that we're an easy minority to attack, although nowadays we're no longer an easy minority to attack. Today, thanks to Hashem, thanks to our army, to the effort we've made, we have an army. They can't just carry out the Holocaust against us so easily anymore. Now our enemies are seeing the consequences, even if they criticize us. By the way, regarding what I mentioned about the program, I haven't seen it yet about the environment. The main spokesperson on this topic is a girl who isn't such a girl anymore, named Greta Thunberg. She is a super pro-Palestinian activist, according to her. She criticizes the genocide in Israel and the genocide in Israel, and we are the bad guys. And she says, no, look at all the environmental damage caused by the bombs that Israel produces. But I mean, in the environmental discourse, she hangs a narrative to criticize Israel. And that's very funny because they ask her, hey, what do you think about the war between Russia and Ukraine? Not a word, let alone about the 30 other conflicts happening worldwide at the same time. More real genocides that are happening in real time with the Russians right now, the Alawites in Sudan, and now the upcoming war between India and Pakistan. But the environmental activists, the bad guys, are us, Israel, which is actually contributing a lot to the world's environment. But yes, it's an easy narrative to attack, but that's why I say nowadays, thank God, we live in a different situation than the one you described, what your great-grandparents, your grandfather went through. Nowadays, it's different. Today, we have a country called Israel, and I already promised that I will never allow a Holocaust. And many Jews, the Jews of the world, I think we have that very clear. And October 7th was another reminder that it is possible to hurt us. So we are not going to let ourselves, even if they tell us, and this is a famous phrase, it doesn't matter from whom, but that's how it is. I prefer a criticized Israel to an Auschwitz applauded by the world. So is that the only solution I have for this?
Totally agree. I just thought of a phrase, they can kill us, but they will never be able to put us on our knees again.